A wonderful evening to everyone present here. Welcome to Vista 2021, powered by our title sponsor, Bank of Baroda. In line with this year's theme, Together Towards Tomorrow, we bring to you an exciting panel discussion centered around electric vehicles and alternate fuels, two of the most current topics of the decade, including EV adoption in the country and the various drivers and impediments in the process. The discussion features Mr. PV Balaji, the CFO of Tata Motors Group, and Mr. Naveen Munjal, the Managing Director at Hero Electric. The panel will be moderated by Professor Anshuman Tripathi, who is an ex-general manager at Ford and currently a professor in the Operations Strategy Department at IIM Bangalore. Our first panelist, Mr. PV Balaji, joined the Tata Motors Group as the Chief Financial Officer in November 2017. He is a part of the Tata Motors Executive Committee, and he's responsible for the company's financial performance and helps the company make the right choices to seize the future while driving profitable and sustainable growth. He is also on the boards of Jaguar Land Rover, Tata Motors Finance Group, Tata Technologies, as well as Tata Consumer Products. Sir, we are very excited to have you here with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Our next panelist, Mr. Naveen Munjal, is the Managing Director of Hero Electric Vehicles, a part of the Hero Eco Group. As an entrepreneur, he is widely recognized for shaping the Indian electric two-wheeler industry, as well as his contributions to various forums in the electric vehicle sphere, both in India and abroad. He has built the Hero Electric brand into a leading manufacturer of market leader in the electric two-wheelers market in India. At an international level, Hero Electric launched A2B, a premium brand of electric bicycles. Sir, we are extremely glad to have you here with us today. Our moderator for today is Professor Anshuman Tripathi. Professor Tripathi is a faculty member at IIM Bangalore in the Operations Management Department. Thank you, sir, for being here with us today. With this, we'd like to hand over the floor to Professor Tripathi to kick off the session. We request the audience to put any questions they have in the Q&A section under the chats option on the platform. Over to you, Professor Tripathi.
Yeah. Thank you, Rishabh. Thank you, Mr. Balaji. Thank you, Mr. Munjal, for accepting our offer for being part of this panel. And I think just to help the audience for the first few minutes, we'll have both of you talking about various topics that are general interest whenever we talk about electric vehicles and things that come in. And I think most interesting, so let's probably start with you, Mr. Balaji. If you talk about Tata Motors, there was a truck company which then started getting into cars in 91, 92 with Tata Estates and Tata 207. And then we had the first monocoques, which were the Tata Indica. And now in electric, we are seeing that almost each of your variants kind of has an electric version also out there. And there's that strong push into electric. We also see the Tata Group as a larger group looking at the ecosystem, looking at manufacturing on components and various other parts. And also the other part that we see very interestingly in EV is the government role. At one point you were talking about FAME 1, FAME 2. At the other end, you said is when does the FAME go away and we actually see government primarily as a facilitator. So maybe if you can walk us through the journey of Tata Motors, how they look at electric vehicles and the role of government and also the ecosystem. Beyond, there's two parts of the ecosystem. One is what is Tata Motors creating, and the second one is beyond Tata Motors, what is the larger Indian or global ecosystem that you depend on? Thank you, Mr. Wallace.
Thank you. Thanks, I think really appreciate the opportunity for speaking to the audience. I think, Tata Motors, most of you know, so therefore I wouldn't spend too much time explaining Tata Motors to you, but a 75-year-old historical company and someone that has reinvented itself over various cycles and to be where it is today. And today, and the philosophy of the Tata Group is do what is right for the country, and therefore accordingly the business choices get made. And we truly believe that what's right for the country is right for Tatas, and therefore with this in mind is how the Tata EV journey has also begun. And if you notice that 12 out of the 15 most polluted cities in the world are actually based in India, you don't have much of a choice in terms of ensuring that we respond to that crisis that is out there. And EV is one of the responses that is out there. And in doing so, what we are also very clear is that the OEM or the car manufacturers, we have one role to play, but we also need to ensure that the rest of the pieces of the puzzle also fall in place. And we can't wait for those puzzles to fall in place and then subsequently we then make our move. We actually have to make the pieces fall in place. And that is with that in mind that the whole Tata universe as a concept was created. And this also is in line with the Tata Group philosophy under the new chairman of driving scale synergy. And we believe there's a significant synergy between the various players within the Tata Group, which could actually help drive this for us. And if I lay out the roadmap for us, I think it started with us making up our mind that we need to win the EESL tender that came out in 2017. And accordingly, we moved in 2017. We won the tender within a record time of just 4 months from concept to design to delivery of the vehicle and ensuring we win the tender. And that was important for the reasons of first understanding what are the use cases in India, because the Indian driving use cases are very, very different to the rest of the world. And therefore, you can read it in the books and try and say this is how we need to respond, or we can actually win the tender, put the cars out there, ensure that they deliver to the specifications of the ESL tender. But at the same time, we learn like mad in terms of how our Indian drivers actually drive. And then when you start speaking to the customers, you realize actually things are pretty different. And we are more worried about whether in a flooded road, will the EV get electrocuted? Will I get electrocuted driving in a car? In a dusty condition, will the contacts actually work, or will I need to solder it again? Or in a bumpy condition, if the road actually scrapes the battery, will I have a fire in the battery? So there are so many concerns which are almost uniquely Indian. And in the Western markets, the reason why a battery lasts or really drains out is because it's too cold. But for us, it's because it's too hot and we blast the AC. And therefore, we need to first get our use cases right. And that helped us actually get that piece right. And today, I think we're in a position where we are saying that, and that's a concept we said, we need to brand the whole EV offering. The powertrain needs to be branded. You just can't brand the car, you have to brand the powertrain. And hence Ziptron as a concept was launched, where we're actually able to confirm that this is waterproof, dustproof, which are all very important for the customers from a fear perspective. And then I think too many EVs have been launched with just either we're talking too much tech. We talk about what's the range, we talk about what's the power. We completely forget that in an EV, it's probably one of the biggest thing to sell actually is the thrill of riding an EV. Because when you sit in the car and actually floor the pedal, you get a silly grin on your face. And that silly grin on the face is what we want to capture. And so the branding became very important to ensure that we call out the right reasons for buying the car, which is the thrill of riding. And then the economics, the residual values, the commercials of it also take over, but for the brand, because it's not just the man in the house who's trying to take a very logical decision. There's also you actually drive a car because you enjoy driving a car. And that's something which you wanted to showcase. So the entire Nexon branding was all about the thrill of riding a car. And when you get the ecosystem right, when you get the economics right, and you get the brand right, then you have the journey that is starting. And you're now suddenly realizing that we are able to see TCOs of electric vehicles now starting to go below diesel, given the way the EV price, the diesel prices are going up. And as more and more regulations come into the country with respect to CO2 emissions, the cost of buying an IC engine actually starts going up. BS6, you know, the kind of price increases that happen with diesel. And we notice that maybe another 3 to 5 years from now, it's quite likely that you'll have a situation where EV electric cars will actually start becoming cheaper than IC engine cars. And that is, yes, with FAME incentives. And the role of the incentives the government has played has been fabulous, because you need to create an ecosystem of viable vendors, viable OEMs, viable charging service providers for us to actually make this work. And that is what the FAME incentive is trying to do, where it's trying to subsidize the delta portion between IC engine and EV. And once that, it's more like a pump priming. Nobody is expecting this to last forever. So it is, you have to pump prime this economy, the EV economy, and FAME incentive does that. Add to it GST, add to it road tax, add to it some of the personal income tax benefit that people get. EV is becoming pretty affordable. And as the campaign for EV starts moving, more and more people get onto it. People realize your running cost of running an EV is about a rupee or a rupee and 25 paisa, versus you spending almost 8-9 rupees on running a petrol or a diesel version, depending on what version you drive. That's a huge economic difference. And therefore, we believe this, when you put it all together, the EV ecosystem is now starting to come together. And we would expect in the next 3 to 5 years, this will be a very exciting journey for us. That's how I see the overall development.
something more, Mr. Balaji? What about the ecosystem among the Tata groups and the different Tata group companies, how they are coming together? Because that's a very interesting thing, which I think you have an advantage of, which you're trying to play. So would you want to elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, one of the biggest worries people were used to be having is whether will the grid actually hold when so many people actually charge up. How do I ensure? Because we don't have, I mean, I don't think we can think in terms of setting up the charging infrastructure first and then you'll have the cars coming in. It won't work that way. No guy will go and put it out there. So where this benefit of the Tata ecosystem comes together is we share our plans quite clearly. So we know the OEM knows where it is going to go and sell, and you have Tata Power coming back and laying on the charging infrastructure. One of the biggest areas where we'll find a challenge would be in terms of the battery management system, where the thermal dynamics of the battery has to be taken care of, where I think between Tata Technologies, LHC and TCS, we are able to see the three guys come together to put the software together for this. Third, when you go look at the batteries, at a point in time, you have to start sourcing batteries, where Tata Chemicals inputs start becoming very valuable in terms of what's the cell chemistry that we want to work with. Or you then realize the front end, where between the kind of catchment customers for this kind of a product is very similar to the guy who's buying a Sony Bravia TV or a Sharp refrigerator. And there Tata Chroma comes into play in terms of them figuring out, okay, these are all the top cost customers that we want to work with. So we believe this, putting it all together, and sorry, the big one that is there will be on financing arrangements, because how are you going to ensure the vehicle becomes affordable? How can I get it into fleets? Fleets are very keen to ensure residual value is protected. So the OEM then takes the lead in putting the strategy together, and the various facets of these guys come together. And that's been something that has been created on day one when he started to put the EV together. So we believe this is how, and this actually is, we are not just restricting this to just Tatas. You'll then realize once we start coming together, the rest of the players also come together nicely. TACO coming on to doing battery management system. And we'll find similarly, people, if they want to set up battery setup, they know that this ecosystem is already thriving. And we would then want to replicate it with other people as well. This is not a closed group. This is a more I would call as the group that actually catalyzes the move, and others can join in from there. That's how we're seeing it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Balaji. Okay, Mr. Munjal, okay, coming back here, with Hero, everyone knows the Hero motorcycle brand. But of course, you are not from that same group. You are a different, and recently you made it very clear in the newspaper interview that yes, you are different and you have the rights to the EV part of Hero, branding rights to the entire EV system. So it will be interesting to know how you have evolved, because you are now from the two-wheeler side, and you would be looking at a much bigger volume and much more rural reach, if I may say, and much more deeper, because that's how you're looking at. So how would you try to talk about the ecosystems, the development of EV? What got you interested in the EV and so on? Your thoughts, Mr. Munjal.
Thank you, Professor Pati. Thank you for having me here. Okay, so let me just tell you a little bit about our journey so far, and then I'm going to jump into the questions that you were asking about the ecosystem and what's really happening and what's ahead. So basically, we actually started this whole electric journey way back in 2001. Now, at that point of time, the whole idea was that you had a cycle at about 1,400 rupees, and then you had a motorcycle or a scooter at 44,000 rupees. That was a kind of a price gap that existed. So how do you bridge that gap? How does a customer who's using a bicycle go from there? How does he jump up to a motorcycle or scooter? So we introduced an electric cycle at that point of time. Now, that didn't quite work quite well at that point, because the technology was quite latent, quite nascent at that point. Lead-acid battery on the back of a regular bicycle, not a great idea. Went back to the drawing board. 2004, again, we introduced lithium-ion batteries. Actually, that's when we were testing in 2004, but the technology was way too expensive. It was like $1,800 a kilowatt hour. And I remember testing them in the US in terms of putting them, taking a moped, taking out the fuel tank, plugging batteries in, and then seeing if that would work. Didn't quite work that way because there were technical glitches at that point of time in terms of if one cell failed, the whole array would shut down, etc. The BMSs weren't as strong as what they are now. And then in 2007, we jumped whole hog into this. And that's when I also realized that this is a business which is going to involve a lot of attention from our side. This is going to involve, 500% attention from our side, not just, it cannot be a subset of any of our existing businesses. So I started putting together a separate team altogether, a separate supply chain, a separate dealer network, a separate manufacturing base, etc., and a separate sales team. And very, very clear goals that we're never going to get that level of attention if you're a part of any larger company, if you're an offset. So I started setting up an exclusive dealer network at that point of time. In 2009, we actually formed the EV association called SMEV, Society of Manufacturers of Electric Vehicles, of which I was made the president at that point, and I still continue to be. And my CEO, Mr. Sohinder Gill, was made the director general. So we've basically spearheaded this whole move in terms of the policies, in terms of what's been happening, in terms of the common voice of the industry, so to speak. We went into the international markets in a large way, went in with a luxury brand in the European and the American and all of these markets, and it didn't quite work the way that we wanted there because we had a number of disadvantages to our level when we went in there. Now, in the last number of years, we've seen a substantial change in the market. We've seen a substantial push that's happening. There's a lot of tailwinds happening now, whether it is from an ecosystem where companies are now more willing to invest into that ecosystem for electric mobility, or it's the dealer, or it's the governmental push which is happening. But before I get into all of that, let me just step back a little bit and just put this into a little bit of a context. So when we talk about electric mobility, whichever report we may be reading, majority of them actually talk about four-wheelers. It's not about the two-wheeler market. Now, whether it's in the domestic market or it's in the international market. But we have to break this up into different baskets, into different compartments. Two-wheelers, three-wheelers, cars, public transport, commercial vehicles, all have different needs and all will take off at a different time in the whole evolution. The base, what we believe, the low-hanging fruit or the base that we believe is going to be the two-wheeler market. That's where the volumes are going to come in from. So you rightfully said, for various reasons. One, India is a very large two-wheeler market. 80% of the vehicles are two-wheelers. Second, there is a lot of parity which has already come in terms of the IC engine versus the electric counterpart. So if you look at exactly the same performance, electric will always be more expensive to start with at this point. And that parity is going to be achieved in the next couple of years. But with the subsidies in place, the way that it is, and what Mr. Balaji was also talking about. So we've got a very good, strong central subsidy now, which has changed as of June of this year. And that subsidy, basically, that enables the vehicles to become much cheaper. Then you've got 16 odd states which are supporting you also on top of this central subsidy. Now, a number of states are supporting you from a manufacturing push, but a number of them are also working on the demand creation. And that's absolutely critical. Now, the ecosystem for this. Now, at this point of time for two-wheelers, what we've done actually, because of the lack of ecosystem, what we did across our entire product range, which was 5 platforms, 13 models on top of that, is made the batteries portable. Now, the reason for that is because a large part of the country, whether you look at Bangalore or you look at Chennai or Mumbai or Calcutta or Gurgaon or Noida, etc., if you're living in a block of apartments, you may or may not have charging infrastructure on your ground floor where you're parking the vehicles. In a lot of cases, you may not even have charging. You may not even be parking in the complex. You may be parking outside of the compound. So we made our batteries portable. While we did that, there was also issues of range anxiety, where customers felt that, what if I run out of a charge? What is going to happen? So we began by installing a basic but dense charging infrastructure for them. We've already installed about 1,600 stations so far. And that's a number we're going to take it up to about 20,000 or so. And we are then now, but what's also happening is industry is also now pitching in, and we're going to see a number of partnerships coming our way also. So the idea was to give customer confidence that he's not going to come to a standstill anywhere. Should he come to a standstill, he can plug in a vehicle anywhere and charge. If he doesn't have the charging infrastructure at home, he can take the battery up to his apartment, charge it there, or take it to his workplace or whatever be the case. So we've seen interesting times. There have, of course, been challenges as well. And a number of the challenges has been to do with the financing of the vehicles, which has been very, very slow as against IC. But what we're going to see is still last year, the market essentially was a low-speed market. Now, because of this change which has happened in the policy, we're going to see a transition from the low speed to what we classify as a city speed. There's no definition of a city speed as per ARAI norms. There are 2 definitions, low speed and a high speed. Low speed is below 25 kilometers, requires no license, registration, road tax, and anything over that is a high speed vehicle. But we've broken that up into a city speed category and a high speed category. Now, a city speed category is where we believe the belly of the market for the next number of years is going to be. And because we've reached price parity, we are down to sub 60,000 rupees in terms of our initial purchase price. In terms of running costs, we are far lower than either an IC engine vehicle or even public transport for that matter. So if you're commuting about 40 kilometers or 50 kilometers a day, you're looking at 100 rupees for IC engine vehicle, a two-wheeler. You're looking at about 70 odd rupees when it comes to public transport. And for electric, you're looking at, for our city speed vehicles, you're looking at anything from 12 to 15 rupees at max. So there's a huge differential which is there. So initial purchase price is lower, the TCO gap has widened substantially, and your running cost is now lower. So that's where we believe now there's going to be a lot of traction in the two-wheeler segment. And this is a segment which is really going to explode going from here on.
Right. So, Mr. Munjal, can you just say, and when you started developing it, as you started growing, and you're going to talk about huge volumes also. So what about the supply chain ecosystem and, the service network, for example, because you will have to penetrate pretty deep.
So number of things, a number of events there. One, the supply chain is falling in place. So we've had a number of challenges in that in the last couple of years. There was, of course, a lot of fence sitting happening by tier 1, tier 2 suppliers in terms of, they would want to put their foot in the door, but not really open the door completely in terms of investment, simply because the volumes are so low. Last year, the entire two-wheeler industry was about 150,000 units, as against many millions of IC engine. But what we believe this market is, the way it's going to moving, is it's going to be a minimum of about 4 million units in the next 4 to 5 years. That's the bare minimum how this industry is going to transition. The supply chain is now falling in place. Of course, the batteries still don't get manufactured in India. They're getting packaged here, they're getting assembled here, but the cells are not getting manufactured. But for that, there's now the PLI scheme, which has got 18,100 crores allocation. And I believe that in the next 2 to 3 years, we are going to see a number of companies coming into the battery manufacturing as well, the cell manufacturing, because the shift is now inevitable. It's not a matter of when and where and what. This is happening now. It's already happening. Now, in terms of the market, a large part of our market so far has been tier 3, tier 4, and rural, tier 2. So about almost over 40% of our dealer network and sub-dealer network. So the way we are handling that is we are appointing dealers, and then we are appointing sub-dealers beyond those dealers to go into the rural markets. Now, while that's the case, I spoke about the charging infrastructure. We realize that the network we have right now, which is wide across the country, we've got 700 dealers and sub-dealers, but that's still not large enough. So if a customer has any issues, or if he has a minor breakdown of flat tires or something on those lines, what do we really do? So we've been training these roadside mechanics, which we call as PGOs, preferred garage owners. We've trained about 6,000 of them. The idea is to take it to about 25,000 in the next 2 years. Now, again, we are going to partner with a number of companies in order for the skill sets that are going to be imparted. And now with this COVID, because technology is getting deployed in a much faster fashion, the way that we are communicating even now on a platform like Zoom. Earlier, you would have called me in person. You would have had us in person somewhere. But now you can disperse technology in a much faster fashion. So that's what we're doing. And of course, there are a number of partnerships that we are building up in the process in terms of, whether it's financing, it's penetration into the market, it's service, it's deliveries to people's homes, it's actually getting the charging infrastructure out, also swapping to that extent in some cases.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Munjal. So, it brings me to the second part of a question, which I was touched upon by both of you briefly. If you look at the government support coming from the government, of course, there is FAME 1, now we are into FAME 2. And the second part of it is also, we should not be blind that ESL, the ESL part of it, which is forcing a lot of government purchases to go into the electric side, and also in the Jawaharlal Nehru urban, this thing, they are also again forcing them to go electric, and that's another good push from the government side to actually force the procurement of electric products and everything. So do you see the subsidy part of it, not the ESL part? Because I think things like ESL will continue for quite some time until it becomes mainstream into government purchasing. But FAME, at some point of time, FAME will have to go, okay? And it will be a government playing probably a bigger role as a facilitator rather than a subsidizer. So where do you see, Mr. Balaji, that part happening? Or do you think that we are a little bit away from that part happening?
At this point in time, the role of ESL in facilitating demand is critical, because they've opened possibilities and also helped us to put vehicles on the ground and fine-tune them as we speak. But if I look at the volumes that you're talking about, the government volumes will be the smallest, then would be the fleet market, and the big guy is the personal mobility market. So therefore, there are 3 levels to it, and this will be the biggest, will be the personal mobility market. So therefore, I see the role of ESL as a catalyst, and they are doing a fabulous job in that particular piece. I think the FAME incentives, I think when we start looking at business cases, we would never want to, we use that as the initial days, when obviously the base is too high, but in terminal value assumptions, or the way you would want to look at it in the medium term also, one wouldn't assume stuff coming through. And I think it should be looked upon, as I said earlier, it's like you're pump priming the EV economy, because as you start getting along, you should look at FAME on its own. Along with it, there's also a phased manufacturing plan. In the phased manufacturing plans, you're focusing on localizing specific components. The beautiful part of the phased manufacturing plan, it's not like a percentage valuation that you need to bring in, because everybody will run all over the place, localizing whatever they can. Here, actually, there are very clear mandates. You'll localize BMS now, you'll localize motors now, you'll look inverters now, which means there isn't scale. But that thing, if inverter is getting localized, everybody will localize inverters, which means you will be able to get scale, and then accordingly, you'll then have viability established here. And as this localization comes up, then along with it, the whole battery cost will break the 100 barrier at some point in time. And when these combinations come in, FAME will not be necessary at all, because you'll be perfectly fine in terms of the economics will work out thereafter. So I think it is a short to a medium term intervention. The medium to long term will be things standing on its own. At the same time, don't forget that the cost of IC engines will keep increasing consistently as fuel prices continue to rise. One. Two, the cost of regulations will keep going up, and CO2 emissions will start becoming more and more expensive. And as low displacement engines start getting into trouble on diesel because of the cost going up, you will be forced to go to gasoline. If you're forced to go to gasoline or CNG, after a point in time, you'll not be able to meet your commitments under COP21. This combination, you put it together, this curves will cross. And therefore, I see FAME as a way of moving the curve to the left rather than something that is there permanently.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, what about you, Mr. Munjal? What's your view?
So there's a number of important factors to be considered here. So what we did actually is in 2009 till 2019, our business was very largely dependent on subsidies. So a large number of our vehicles actually took subsidy. But the whole idea was that we have to transition away from this whole subsidy model. So what we've done as a business is at a P&L level, we don't really take subsidy as a base. We take that as a separate heading altogether, because today it's here, tomorrow it may not be there. And then what happens? Does your business fall flat on its face, or is it sustainable enough for it to continue in the longer run as well? So we were very, very clear that let's take subsidy out. The business has to be profitable at a very high gross level, at what is acceptable in the automotive sector, at a gross level without the subsidy. Now, should the subsidy be there, that's going to be the icing on the cake. And that's the way that we've built this business. Now, we are very clear that these subsidies, again, are going to go away at some point of time. At this point, certainly they help, because what's happening is, as we are doing localization of different components, the pricing does go up because of the volumes, because we don't have the volumes to scale here. When you compare it to either whether it's China or Taiwan or any of these other countries, which are very large volumes in the same components. So there is a price increase that happens, and that price increase can be anything from 20 to 30%, depending on what components that you're looking at. Batteries, of course, we have to continue importing right now. We don't have an option at this point of time. So these subsidies will go away, but by then there's enough traction in the market in order for it to really to really catch hold of the market. So when and what's going to happen, as Mr. Balaji was also talking about, the prices are going to continue coming down of the batteries. So we are getting economies of scale in the batteries. We are following the Moore's curve. So it's either the prices are dropping, or we are finding the density of the batteries is improving. And prices have already dropped. If you look at the last 10 years, prices have dropped about 85% in the batteries. Now, there is estimation of it going down to about $66 per kilowatt hour in the next couple of years. But we've pegged it at $110. So when it comes to number crunching and when it comes to our internal calculations, we are a little bit more conservative when it comes to that. So we've looked at a $110 kind of a price bracket, and that the subsidies eventually, now this is till 2024, eventually after 2024, if they go with, then what happens to a business plan? So luckily, our product range is entirely sitting in a band which, even without the subsidies, we are equivalent or slightly lower in terms of pricing to a commuter level motorcycle or a scooter. And so that's the initial purchase price. And like I said, in terms of the TCO, the running of the vehicles, we are multiple times cheaper than when it comes to the other thing. And that's why we divided it up into three categories. The minute you go into the higher speed categories, which is about 70, 80 odd kilometer speeds, the pricing goes up dramatically, the running cost goes up. And the biggest actually challenge there that one is going to face is the battery replacement when you come to look at it. So even 3 or 4 or 5 years from now, when you're looking at replacing a battery of 3 or 4 or 5 kilowatt hours versus 1.5 to 2 kilowatt hours, there's going to be a dramatic difference in terms of the pricing. So a customer is beginning to understand that concept also, that what is my cost going to be of replacement of the battery at a later stage. So what is helping right now is, of course, now, like I said, the central policy is a good one. We've got a number of states which are really propelling this forward, and they've got demand creation. We've got 6 more states which are in the planning process, which will again help tremendously. We've got the PLI for both the manufacturing of vehicles and the components and for the batteries, and then we've got the PMP policies in place. So from that direction, the tailwinds are very, very strong. Now, what is missing and what needs to be done? Of course, financing will come in as we're shifting towards city speed categories, but at this point, financing is still low. We believe that about 30% of the market is going to be a B2B market, now whether it's for deliveries or it's for shared mobility or it's campus usage, etc. And we believe that awareness is a big factor at this point of time. So, when you look at it from a country perspective, and you look at it from a very widespread perspective, awareness is a challenge, but that's as more competition is coming in, awareness is also improving. So we believe this market is, at least for the two-wheeler segment, which I'm talking about here, the market is really going to explode now from here on, and there's going to be no looking back.
Okay, wonderful, Mr. Munjal. So that's interesting to know. Okay, and of course, as you said, that demand creation, that's the initial push, and then you have to fend for yourself. There is no other option on that. Okay, coming back, I teach technology strategy. Something that always intrigues me with electric vehicles, is battery swapping. Okay, is it that I always will need to recharge my battery, or is there a place where I can go into a something like a fuel station or a battery charging station, get my battery removed, put a new battery, and whatever is the balance was there in the old battery, get some credit. And this happened about 3-4 years back or something like that, when Elon Musk demonstrated a 90-second changeover or something like that, which has not moved forward. So something that's always intrigued me is about this battery swapping. And what's your view on that? Do you think there's a future of battery swapping out here, Mr. Munjal?
See, there's when you look at, again, I'm talking about the two-wheelers here. Now, it's far more challenging when you look at the larger form of vehicles, cars, etc. I mean, there's been a model which has been tried earlier, which was better placed in Israel, and that didn't quite work in the same manner as what it was planned to. But let me talk about the two-wheeler market now. There's 3 ways that you can actually charge your battery. One is, of course, your fixed battery, where you need.
We lose him?
I think we've lost him. Yeah. You want to go ahead? Well, we wait for him. I think you can go ahead and we'll bring him back. Oh, sorry, he's back. Mr. Munjal, we lost you for some time. Can you just sorry for the last minute or so?
Oh, sorry. So I was talking about, okay. So this.
You mentioned 3 types of charging, and from there on, if you can go.
Yeah. So the first one, of course, is a fixed battery where you have to have a charging outlet. Now, whether it's a wall outlet or it's a charging station or whatever be the case. The second is that of a swapping station. Now, a battery swapping station, you would need to essentially go to a swapping station and change it. That's just the way that you go for a petrol pump. Sorry, I think the internet is unstable, a bit unstable. So what happens with the swapping station is the battery swapping is that you don't charge your battery at home, and you can't really take it out to charge it at home. What we've gone down the route is a portable battery. In the absence of both of these infrastructure not being in place and the swapping stations not being in place. So we've gone down the portable route where you can charge it from a wall outlet plus take it up to your apartment. Now, going forward, swapping for two-wheelers is doable. That's a workable proposition. However, it's a chicken and egg situation. You're not going to go 10 kilometers out to go and swap your battery. So unless it's extremely close to you, unless you create that infrastructure of actually a grid where you can go and swap your battery at every 2 kilometers or somewhere thereabouts, it's not really going to work for customers. It's different when you look at it from a three-wheeler perspective, because three-wheeler is a commercial vehicle where you really can't have the vehicle stopping for too long to charge. So there, it's a different proposition. It's also different when you look at it from a B2B perspective. So if a person's doing deliveries, then he comes back. For him, swapping could still work, but where we are already offering him the portable battery solution. So swappable would also work going forward. What would happen is that higher performance vehicles, higher powered vehicles would possibly go down the route of the swappable battery, because you can't, again, you don't need to park your vehicle somewhere to charge for a long time. Plus, because of the power of the vehicle, it'll become too expensive the minute you take the battery out of the equation. But I believe that's going to be more in the lifestyle segment to start with and not in the commuter segment. And that's where the large part of the pie is, which is the commuter segment. So that's where we believe the market is going to be for the next couple of years. Now, that market is going to transition to higher speed and higher performance vehicles over a period of time. And batteries become, follow the, like I said, Moore's curve. So as they become cheaper, the density becomes much better in the batteries. So that's how the transition is going to happen.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Munjal. Mr. Balaji, your points?
I think from a passenger vehicle perspective, what happens is the battery actually becomes an integral part of the structural rigidity of the vehicle. So if you try to you need to get to a serious level of standardization for you to be able to say, I'll just pull it out and put it back in. Then you start looking at, we're talking about at least a 30 kilowatt hour kind of battery. So they're pretty heavy stuff. And then the connectors, and you start getting into other quality issues. We have consciously gone the other way, saying that actually we need to ensure, and both of us are trying to achieve is ensuring a hassle-free ride for the customer. That is what we'll finally need to work on. The tech trip is not what we can be on to. So I think we started by saying that the way we want to sell this cars is that if you have a refrigerator at home, you can have a EV at home. So we want to start by saying, can I charge you with a 15 ampere plug? If a 15 ampere plug is there, you can charge anywhere. And then the other thing that's happening is ranges that we are talking about. Already we're hitting at a real life range of 250 kilometers currently. We typically within the city drive 40-50 kilometers a day. That's 5 days of charge. So and then every day and night you come and you charge, just like you charge your iPhones, you come and charge your cars, slow charger at your home, and that's part of the sale of the vehicle itself. We set it up, connect it up, and give it to you as part of the ecosystem. So you're not going to leave the consumer high and dry. And once the highways, as energy density starts increasing, as technology starts changing, we're able to pack more batteries onto it. Then we start getting dedicated architectures. The range starts touching 400-500 kilometers thereafter, which is typically how you'll charge your fuel tank. Your typical fuel tank in a car is like that. So then you don't need a swapping battery on this with one less charge. And don't forget, these are pretty serious guys. These are not you're playing with electric here. So you need to be very, very careful. Safety, everything has to be taken into consideration. So we believe as the technology curve starts coming on, the role for swapping actually will start going down. But it may be relevant for two-wheelers. I'm sure it's relevant for parts of commercial vehicle system like what Mr. Munjal just explained. But from a passenger vehicle perspective, we don't see this as a solution that is going to solve the current issue that we're dealing with.
So this actually brings to the next question. What about fast charging, right? Because if you're saying that, we are going to have in the car, like a fixed battery, then the question of fast charging comes in. Okay.
Fast charger, I think we don't have a choice, particularly if you're going on to highways, you will have to have fast chargers there. And it needs to be benchmarked to how fast does it take for me to fill up a fuel tank. And today the fast charging network will take you 40-45 minutes kind of level. So we need to crack that in any case. But I think don't forget, people are going to use these chargers. I think we need to change the narrative, which is how we are looking at it. It is not about charging to full. We should have the conversation, can I charge 30 kilometers? Can I charge 40 kilometers? We need to change the consumer behavior here. Instead of saying that I want a full charge 80%. So the fuel tank shouldn't be showing what are the percentage residual charge. The fuel tank should be saying how many kilometers to destination. How much kilometers do I have left with me? In which case people saying, okay, I'll go into 5-10 minutes, buy 30 kilometers of charge, and then off I go home and then charge it at my home. So that's more a peace of mind issue, but we have to crack the fast charging network along with similar to the density of petrol pumps in the country today. And we are committed to putting that we will lay that network out from our side, invest in it. Because in all this conversation, the cost of building a car and the cost of building a charging network, you look at it and saying that actually I might as well put a charging infrastructure. It's like buying an elephant and not having the stuff to control it. So you might as well invest in the charging infrastructure and nail it rather than keep waiting for somebody to do it. In the meanwhile, you've already invested in the car and the car is quite expensive. So this combination, we need to just think through, go beyond the real numbers, and then you realize actually it's not such a big deal. It's about, you'll get it at about 8 lakhs a charger, and you want to put about 20,000 chargers, that's 1,600 crores. 1,600 crores, typically Tata Motors will spend 3,500 crores on capex every year. So that's we should be seeing it in that perspective, and then you have a different take there.
Okay. What about you, Mr. Munjal? What's your view on fast charging?
When we look at it from a two-wheeler perspective, and as I was saying, again, you place different vehicles in different buckets. So we've gone down the route of actually making the batteries portable, where you don't require fast charging to that extent. What you do require, and that's, as we are going, what we believe is that most of these vehicles will actually get charged at home at night, and they're not really going to need power during the day unless you need to top up somewhere. So we don't believe in fast charging is the requirement at this point of time. We believe what is required is a very dense but 15 amp charging points all across every building that you go to, whether it's a commercial center or an office or mall or wherever be the case. As long as you have 15 amp plug points, and if you can charge, if you can just plug your vehicle in even for an hour, that'll give you, depending on which model it is, anything from 20 kilometers to about 40, 50 kilometers. And you don't need to invest such into a heavy this thing. I would rather make the batteries more portable. So dense but basic charging infrastructure is what is required.
All right. Please go ahead.
No, I was just saying that, in the last question when you were asking about the swapping part of it, now one of the challenges that exists there, that swapping thing, is that there are no standards right now. So you've got multiple companies, multiple different batteries and different sizes. So it's technically, if you bought a car, you can only go to one kind of a fuel station and not the other. So that's kind of a challenge. But again, the flip side of that challenge is that if you standardize too much right now, where there's so much of innovation happening, you would actually curtail innovation. So that balance is a very fine one, and that's got to be worked.
Yeah, so that's where I came from, is because I teach technology strategy, and I keep telling the students that there is technology, but there's also the customer part. Does the customer really appreciate the technology enough to part with his cash? And what both of you are also telling me is this consumer behavior part and consumer understanding, which has got to mature a lot. It cannot be just on the TCO part and just looking at cost of running or cost of buying. It's also about how my behavior will have to change to actually adapt it much more. And I think that's some part of it. I don't think that's going to happen immediately, but until there is a basic minimum mass numbers in the market and those people start to learn and then spread the word, I think that's what will take a little bit of a time. I have another technical question. We saw the PLI scheme, and very rightly it is not called lithium-ion batteries, it's called advanced chemistry batteries. Okay, kind of leaving the door ajar that anything advanced we are willing to look at. And that brings me, where do you see battery technology? Because I, for one, believe that I don't think we have seen the last of that. We have got a final battery. This is the only way EV is going to happen or something. We see that evolving. I see that evolving, and more so because where do we get so much lithium from? Where do I get so much cobalt from? And so that chemistry is going to keep changing to get it. And then how do you backpack it? Because you're already going towards volumes, and then if you find an advancement, how do you backpack it? Any thoughts on that? I know this is a little too futuristic to think, but yeah, just an idea. Yeah, Mr. Balaji.
I think you're right. I think battery technology will evolve, chemistries will evolve. People will want to take out cobalt. There will be scarcity of resources, and therefore the more and more tech will start pushing towards higher and higher energy densities. And also there is safety to be considered. Lithium, take the LFP technology that is currently in most of the cars today are far more safer than the NMC at this point in time, but obviously that will also change as we go forward. So I think the parameters on which batteries are getting designed are going to be, we look at energy density, we look at depth of discharge, we have a lot of parameters on which people are working towards. I think somewhere along the line, this is the chemistry of it. Then there's a form factor of it. Are you going to do cylindrical? Are you going to prismatic? Are you going to pouch? There's one part of it you need to crack. And then how do you pack it? Are you going to go from pouch to battery to cell to battery to pack, or you go cell to pack? Because then you have different rates of doing it. I think as Mr. Munjal rightly said, this is absolute hotbed of innovation that's currently underway. Then you look at solid state. I mean, there is enough and more literature on this space, and people are throwing phenomenal money onto this. That's the reason the cost curves are coming down. I think we should just let it play. And we as manufacturers, what we would want to do is we take a mature technology, work with it. And if I were a car manufacturer, what I would fundamentally do is fix it at a form factor level so that my cars don't, because thereafter I protected it. Because once I know that I can pack a cylindrical pouch, then a cylindrical cell, then I know the rest, if tomorrow the chemistry changes, it comes back into the cylinder, I'm fine from a structural rigidity perspective. But this is just the start of it. We will keep learning, we will keep changing. So I don't think anybody is in a position to say, this is the tech that will work, and this is the tech that will be there. But in the meanwhile, investments have to happen. Innovation has to happen, investments have to happen, manufacturing has to happen, and execution has to happen. So that's the reason why it's an exciting space. And everything has to move for innovation to happen as well. You just can't keep innovating unless you test it in the market. Okay. So no clear answers here, other than saying be prepared for chaos, be prepared for the joyride, and keep your paybacks short so that you're able to finish off the stuff and move on to the next one. And that's the reason so much of money is also going into this. And these are venture capital money is going in big time, or SPAC money is going in big time, because you need that, what I would call as the risk funding to come into this. This is not, this is a very different kind of capital to what I will do in a traditional commercial vehicle, for instance.
Right. That's right. Thank you, Mr. Balaji. Mr. Munjal, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Balaji when he's talking about the technology evolution. Now, there's a couple of things that I just want to add to that. So the way that we see technology transitioning out is possibly we're going to go more into solid state batteries in the next couple of years. I mean, that's under test already right now, but they've not been commercially proven to that extent yet. And the pricing is, of course, very, very high at this point. But that's a much safer form of the battery. And we are going to see a huge amount of transition that's going to happen. The second thing, we may see other, in between some chemistry changes, like we may see lithium sulfur coming into play, etc. And we've already seen technologies which, as you was talking about, the investments going in. We've seen a number of companies dabble with ultra capacitors in the past, but that's we've not seen much success with, again, ultra capacitors at this point of time, simply because of the way that they function in terms of the energy release that they do. Now, and then of course there's probably going to be a transition towards hydrogen fuel cell, but that for smaller vehicles is probably at least about 20 odd years away. Any technology that you develop, takes about at least 5 to 8 years for it to really come into commercial application. Lithium is something which has been worked on for the past 15 odd years, and we are now getting to this stage. So those are technologies which are still about 15 to 20 years away. And possibly to start with, they will go more into the heavier vehicles, whether it's ships and submarines and commercial applications, etc., and then come down to smaller vehicles, but again, about 20 odd years away. Now, in terms of energy security, or material security for India, we are a little bit late in that whole process, to be honest. I mean, we should have actually started this journey about 15 years back or even 10 years back. But in 2019, we set up Kabil, which was the joint venture, which is the government consortium of NALCO and MECL and HCL, basically to do mineral exploration and find lithium and other reserves, so we are not dependent on other countries. Now, it's a little bit late, but nevertheless, we are coming in at a time where we can leapfrog technologies, because what's happening is even the battery chemistry, for example, we've been using lithium for the past 6 years now, but our chemistry has changed also about 3 times in the past 6 odd years. So that's how fast the technology is changing, it's evolving, and the chemistries are changing. And the lithium content, and even in motors we see now, the motors and the new ones that are coming out are looking at doing away with rare earth materials, etc. So as the dependence on certain countries is not really there to that extent. So I think there's a lot of innovation that's going to happen. There's a lot of transition that's going to happen. One thing is clear, that going forward, the emissions from the vehicles are going to be nil. So it's going to be a absolutely clean emission vehicle. And that's the path forward. We're not going to go back to emitting vehicles at all. That's clear.
Wonderful. So I think what I transition to is some questions that have come across in the chat sessions from the students, okay, and other participants all over India. And we've got about 10 minutes. So I'll select the question. So there's one which says, how do you look at the new entrants in the EV space, which, Mr. Balaji rightly said, too much of VC money going into it right now, okay, which are mainly from the inexperienced startup background? Are there potential disruptions to the traditional automobile incumbents? Mr. Munjal, since many of them are in the two-wheeler segment.
Yeah, so I was told there's about 150 odd companies which have announced their plans of coming into electric mobility.
In India?
In India, yeah. I mean, already there. I mean, announcements made, products, launches, etc., all of that stuff. Okay. See, it's very clear, and Mr. Balaji can back me up on this. Automotive is a very different ballgame. Building that supply chain, building a dealer network, or whichever way that you're going to sell, the service network. No matter, these vehicles may be low service, but they're not no service. At some point of time, you will have accidents and breakdowns, and you will need replacements of different components. Plus, there may be simpler vehicles in terms of the number of parts that go in, but they're by no means a simple vehicle with the technology that's going to go in. The whole critical factor is going to be, how do you see, when you look at traditional models, the core technology that you controlled as an IC engine company was actually an engine technology, and other things you could outsource. That's what you held close to your chest. What's going to happen in electric is a lot of collaborations. It's not going to be necessarily the case that I'm going to put my stake in the ground and say, this is the technology I'm going with, and this is it. And for the next 20 years, it's going to remain. It's not even going to remain for the next 2 to 3 years, and which is why companies like us and a number of others are trying to be as agile and as flexible in terms of the technological developments that are coming in. So companies coming in is definitely good. It expands the market, it increases the market. End of the day, what is going to count is the customer experience. Customer getting the product, what he wants, at a price that he wants, and in terms of the service, so the serviceability, etc. So this market will only expand with more companies coming in. But going forward, we're not going to have the number of companies that we have at this point of time. That number is going to shrink down to 80% of the market is probably going to be about a 10 odd unit or somewhere thereabouts, if I can throw a number thereabouts. And then you're going to have specialized companies who are working on very high powered vehicles or specialized B2B vehicles or certain other segments. But it's actually going to shrink down dramatically. We're not going to see the number of companies we have at this point.
Okay, the 150 number is really astounding. That's a really big number of people jumping into it. What about you, Mr. Balaji? What about the four-wheeler segment and more the trucks and buses? That's also a big one.
I think any innovating in a place where there's significant innovation, everybody believes that they will be able to take a shot at it, and you can believe you can disrupt the innovator. So it's a traditional, is it a sustaining innovation or a disruptive innovation? And as long as market players who are currently out there are aware of what is happening and they have a better chance. So you should be clear that it's sustaining innovation or a disruptive innovation. And in this point in time, I think EV is a space where I think if played well, it can be a disruptive innovation. And we ourselves want to think of ourselves as disruptors and not as people who are out there. Because for us, it can use you a very different way of thinking about this whole lot. And it's a very simple logic. If you think of ICE, what do you do for an ICE engine? Why do you need that, the V8s and the V6s of the world? Because it's about torque. And here you get torque for free. That's what electric motors are about. If you fundamentally say that I'll use this to actually change the way I run my business model, actually we can look at a future which is very different. So we think of this as a great opportunity. And more competition, always welcome, more ideas, new ways of doing stuff. But as Mr. Munjal very rightly pointed out, finally the buck stops in the customer experience. And there is a huge data journey also that's coming out of this. Electric vehicles are by design automatic, by design connected, by design you'll be able to work with a hell of a lot of data onto it as well. So therefore, if you're able to position yourself in the right space, and Thierry, head of JLR, calls it rightly, saying what are the critical control points in this value chain? Are you able to hold that critical control points? If you get that piece right, you don't have to own it. You should be in a position to actually touch it. If you can do that, then I think we're in a good place. If we don't touch it, then we deserve to be as part of the dinosaurs.
All right. Let me, it's very interesting. And let me say, as it seems, government's concern is to reduce dependencies on imports, let it be for crude or lithium ion. Which solution do you think can be the long-term market fit in alternate fuel space? Is there a good scope for fuel cell vehicle? If yes, then how can OEMs focus on developing multiple technologies at the same time? I guess you have addressed this by and large when we had the discussion on fuel cell and hydrogen cells and everything. So I think I will just pass this question because this has been well discussed. The next one, since capital investment in EV infrastructure will have higher payback period compared to traditional IC vehicles, does that affect the company's capital allocation, eventually slowing down the growth of the EV business unit? If yes, what can be done in this case? I guess even in this, you have addressed to some extent, saying that you are actually looking at having paybacks which are much quicker, and that allows you the technology transitions much faster. Okay, but is there something more you want to add, or that's?
The only point I'll add is the flavor of the capital here will be different. It will be there will be risk capital coming into it. This can't just be traditional capital that is sitting out there, and particularly parts of the value chain may have very high risk capital coming in. Because the risk return equations will be very, very different for that. So depending on which element you're looking at, if you're looking at a charging infrastructure, that's for me feels more like a utility. Therefore, that risk capital will be very different compared to somebody putting money in batteries or in motors. It's a very different kind of space that you're onto it. So accordingly, the market is sorting itself out on this in any case.
I guess that's always the case, right? Let the market sort it out. They will find out the best way about, and then you have that interaction between the technology provider and the vehicle manufacturer, then the vehicle manufacturer and the net final, retail customer. And it's all going to sort it out on what is the best way to do it. Mr. Munjal, anything else to add?
I was just going to say that, in terms of, we know that this market is going to transition towards electric. But there are going to be a lot of hiccups on the way in terms of, which way you're going. We know that what is the end goal. Now, when you look at the ecosystem, for example, when we talk about our charging infrastructure that we are creating, we are not looking at it as a capital investment. We're looking at it more as a marketing expenditure from our side, because what we find is customers don't really use it to that extent at all. They're charging the vehicles at home. They've got enough charge to take them from anything from 70 kilometers to 210 kilometers on a day-to-day basis, depending on which batteries they've chosen and how many batteries they put in the vehicle. But it's just to give them peace of mind. So some parts of this investments that are going to go in are going to be not necessarily easily attributable to returns which are going to come in a very short span. These are going to be long-term investments which are basically seeding the market in a different manner. And that's how I think that's going to transition.
Okay, so there's one more question, Mr. Balaji, very specific to Tata. Since it has a significant presence in both the automobile as well as power sector, can it be leveraged to resolve the challenges faced in EV sector in lesser time? I guess you've already mentioned it. Is there something more you want to add?
The added angle that Mr. Munjal touched upon it, I think we should go back to the world of ESG, because scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions are going to become very, very critical in which companies actually operate. In this, as we go net zero, I think the scope 3 emissions will have to end there. Without a role that hydrogen comes into play, there's no way you can solve it for a company like Tata Motors, given our commercial vehicle presence. Where I think the role Tata Power and us can actually do a very good job of doing it together is scope 2. Because the source of energy, if it goes green, then you're able to say that the electricity generated is green, and therefore I'm scope 2 emission 0. And there Tata Power and us can actually play a very good role to working together on this. And in fact, Tata Power will work with the entire Tata ecosystem on that particular thing.
Right.
Scope 1 is our job, as how you manage within Tata Motors, its environment, and we are assuming the energy will be whatever it is. So if you look at it from a scope 1, 2, 3, we'll have to work together, and there I think the role with Tata Power is very, very crucial.
All right, thank you. Right, so I think we are running out of time, so I just want to thank you very much for taking time out, both of you, Mr. Balaji, Mr. Munjal, and I hope the audience has really understood a little bit more about EVs, and especially on the business side, which doesn't come through so easily, and getting it from the horse's mouth, whether it's 4-wheeler or 2-wheeler, got that variety out. So I leave it to the moderators if they want to, how they want to close it. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Balaji. Thank you.
Bye.
So we have the vote of thanks coming.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mr. Munjal and Mr. Balaji, for chatting out time from your busy schedules and for the insightful session that we had. We'd also like to thank Professor Tripathi for making the discussion interesting through his questions. The session has been really enlightening for us, and we really like the point about how Tata is leveraging its overall ecosystem in its strategy for electric vehicles and battery management. And also it was interesting to know how Tata is pursuing a phased manufacturing plan through the localization of different components of EVs. And we also found the point about how Hero set up its own supply chain for the electric vehicles segment to address the gaps, and how the price dynamics of the batteries and government policies are driving the industry. These were some really very insightful comments for us. And thank you once again for this profound discussion. As a small token of our gratitude, we have made a contribution to Enrich Lives Foundation in your name. This contribution has helped serve 3 square meals to 10 children impacted adversely by the COVID. Thank you for the same. Thank you, speakers.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be. Thank you.
Thank you.